Be sure to give the video a thumbs up, share your insights in the comments, and subscribe to keep up with our newest narratives. I never thought I would end up in a situation like this at 62. Life, it seems, was meant to follow a certain script by this point. Days begin with nurturing my garden, followed by serene afternoons lost in books, and evenings shared with my husband, Mark, as we reflect on the memories we've created together. Yet, on one fateful evening, a clandestine dialogue transformed everything, prompting me to reevaluate my understanding of the world. The tale began at a corporate gala organized by Mark's company. He dedicated over 30 years to that place, steadily climbing the ladder with relentless commitment. Richard Caldwell, his boss, exuded a subtle yet commanding presence, a figure with whom I had merely shared courteous greetings at past gatherings. In his mid-60s, he stood tall and distinguished, exuding a quiet confidence that appeared entirely effortless. The gala took place at a luxurious hotel in downtown Chicago, where grand chandeliers illuminated the elegantly attired guests with a warm radiance. The atmosphere buzzed with lively chatter, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the soothing strains of a jazz band playing softly in the corner. Though I wasn't especially enthusiastic about these gatherings, finding solace in the familiarity of home, Mark's insistence led me to don a simple navy blue dress and join him. At first glance, everything appeared to be perfectly ordinary. Mark engaged in lively discussions with his colleagues, while I found myself conversing with the other spouses. Everything changed when Richard came up to me. "Evelyn, could I steal a moment of your time?" he inquired, his rich voice cutting through the noise of the room. I paused. A moment? What could Mark's supervisor possibly want from me? Yet I offered a courteous smile and nodded, trailing behind him as he guided me down a side corridor, distancing us from the main ballroom. The atmosphere was more serene in this place, the lively sounds of the gala gradually diminishing in the distance. He led me to an intimate lounge, a snug space adorned with soft lighting, a crackling fireplace, and plush leather armchairs. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet yet unmistakable tension. My heart raced slightly as I settled into the seat opposite him. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial," he said, giving a slight, almost anxious smile. "Not at all," I reassured him, though the curiosity stirring within me was hard to ignore. "What's on your mind?" He sighed, rubbing his hands together, as if he were sifting through thoughts. Finally, he found his voice. "It's about Mark." At that moment, I straightened in my chair, a knot forming in my stomach. "Is something wrong?" He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Not exactly. Yet, there's a truth I believe you ought to hear." The gravity of his words settled in the air before he even spoke. His expression held a weight that disturbed me, a subtle fervor that sent my heart racing. "Evelyn," he continued, his tone soft yet resolute, "I've known Mark for a long time. I have observed him cultivate his professional journey, uplift his peers, and nurture his family. Amidst everything, I've observed a certain something." I took a deep breath. "What is it exactly?" He leaned in a bit, his eyes fixed intently on me. "He doesn't appreciate you the way he should." The word struck me like a weighty stone in my chest. My breath hitched, and a surge of defensiveness welled up inside me. I don't understand," I stuttered. "Mark is a good husband." "He's always been." Richard nodded. "I know he is. But tell me, Evelyn, when was the last moment he genuinely recognized your essence? Not merely as his wife, but as the extraordinary woman you are." I parted my lips to reply, yet silence enveloped me. He pressed on, his tone gentler this time. "I've noticed the way your eyes linger on him when he's caught up in his own world. I've seen you linger in the shadows at gatherings like this, as he immerses himself in his tasks. You invest so much, but does he reciprocate?" A knot tightened in my throat. I yearned to argue, to assert that he was mistaken, yet a part of me hesitated. "I don't intend to intrude," Richard remarked, reclining a bit. "But sometimes an outsider sees what those inside cannot." I let out a slow breath, my thoughts swirling. Richard examined my expression, then gave a subtle, understanding smile. "Evelyn, you deserve to be seen." The words resonated deeply, awakening a part of me I hadn't known was there. For the first time in ages, uncertainty washed over me, leaving me unsure of my emotions. I remained still, paralyzed. Richard's words lingered in my thoughts, awakening feelings I wasn't prepared to face. You deserve to be seen. Had I truly been invisible for such an extended period? I wanted to dismiss his words as just an observation, a kind-hearted yet misguided gesture. Yet, beneath the surface, a part of me recognized the truth in his statement. Mark was a good man, a diligent provider. He had always been consistent, dependable. Yet in those hushed moments, the ones that held significance, when had he last genuinely seen me? When had he last acknowledged the subtle ways I endeavored to keep our life vibrant and rich? The manner in which I folded his shirts just as he preferred. The manner in which I adorned our home with his cherished belongings. The way I remained steadfast beside him during each professional victory, allowing myself to take a step back. I cleared my throat, suppressing the knot that had formed within me. Richard. He raised a hand, halting my words. I don't wish to put you in an awkward position, Evelyn. Yet, I found it impossible to remain silent. I exhaled slowly, acknowledging your candor with gratitude. I finally spoke, my voice softer than I had meant it to be. Yet, Mark and I have shared decades together. Marriage encompasses more than mere visibility. It revolves around dedication and consistency. Richard acknowledged with a nod. I understand, and I respect that. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. But have you ever pondered what you genuinely desire? The question hung in the air between us. I had spent countless years concentrating on Mark's needs, the demands of our marriage, and the expectations placed upon me. I had never genuinely paused to consider my own desires. I released a soft, anxious chuckle. Richard, this is certainly an intriguing discussion to engage in at a corporate gala. That brought a smile to his face. I suppose it is. Yet, an instinct urged me to voice it. A silence lingered between us, punctuated solely by the gentle crackling of the fireplace. He let out a sigh as he rose to his feet. I should let you get back, he said. I stood as well, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed down my dress. Indeed, Mark will be curious about my whereabouts. Richard acknowledged this with a nod, yet his expression held an enigmatic quality. Evelyn made me promise one thing, though. I tilted my head. What is that? Please don't brush off my words. Consider them carefully. I paused for a moment, then nodded deliberately. Very well. He offered me a faint smile before moving aside, indicating the door with a gesture. As I strolled by him, I sensed the warmth of his presence lingering near me, the heaviness of our earlier discussions still resting on my heart. The gala buzzed with energy when I made my way back. Mark remained exactly where I had left him, engrossed in dialogue with his peers. Initially, he was unaware of my presence. I lingered at a distance for a brief moment, observing him. His expression was lively, and his hands gestured expressively as he communicated. It was a facet of him I had always cherished, his fervor, his ambition. Yet, I pondered Richard's words. Had Mark ever regarded me in that manner? When he finally turned his gaze and noticed me standing there, he offered a brief nod before returning to his discussion. A change stirred within me. Richard had sown a seed, and despite my efforts to dismiss it, I sensed it was already taking root. The journey home was silent. Mark sat beside me, his hands tightly holding the wheel, his eyes locked on the shadowy road ahead. The city lights flashed by in a haze, yet my thoughts wandered far from the present. Richard's words resonated in my mind, his voice haunting me in a way I couldn't escape. You deserve recognition. I caught a glimpse of Mark. He appeared weary, a subtle line of tension etched between his brows. Nearly 40 years of marriage had allowed me to memorize every detail of his face. The sharp lines of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his lips pressed together in concentration. Yet, when was the last time he had truly looked at me? He cleared his throat, shattering the silence. Did you enjoy yourself this evening? The inquiry took me by surprise. It was a question he posed after every occasion, every assembly, every meal shared, almost as if it were a ritual rather than a sincere interest. I paused before responding. It was intriguing. He nodded absent-mindedly. Well, and just like that, the dialogue came to a close. I shifted my attention back to the window, observing the city fade into the distance as we ventured toward the serene suburbs. Upon our arrival, Mark followed his usual routine. He removed his jacket, placed his keys on the counter, and withdrew to his office for a final glance at his emails. I lingered in the kitchen for a while, gazing at the vacant spot where he had just stood. I didn't feel anger towards him. Not really. Mark had always been like this, committed to his craft, consistent in his habits. He had provided me with a comfortable existence, a stable existence. Yet Richard's words had stirred something within me, something I couldn't suppress any longer. I made my way to the bedroom and glimpsed my reflection in the mirror. At 62, my once auburn hair now bore streaks of silver. Faint lines etched my face, serving as reminders of the years I had experienced. Yet my eyes remained unchanged. Within them, I discovered a feeling I hadn't recognized in ages. Isolation. I had always thought this was simply a facet of growing older. This subtle retreat into the shadows, this slow descent into monotony. But now, for the first time, I questioned if that was truly the case. The following morning, as Mark departed for work, he kissed me on the cheek and said, "I'll be home late. A significant client meeting looms ahead." I nodded, a subtle smile gracing my lips. "Very well. Stay safe." And then he disappeared. I lingered in the doorway for a while before retreating back inside. Typically, my days are consumed by errands, housework, or tending to the garden. However, today brought a sense of restlessness. Before I could convince myself otherwise, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I never imagined I would. Richard picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn?" There was a subtle hint of surprise in his voice. I inhaled slowly. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" There was a pause. And then softly, of course. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from him at a serene cafe by the lake. The aroma of roasted coffee beans and freshly baked pastries filled the air. Outside, the autumn leaves twirled gracefully in the breeze. Richard regarded me with a gentle curiosity. "I found myself uncertain about whether I would receive a message from you." As I stirred my coffee, I observed the delicate dance of cream merging with the rich, dark liquid. The thought of making a call lingered in my mind, but I hesitated. He nodded, anticipation in his eyes. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Your words have lingered in my mind." His expression was a mystery. I paused for a moment before locking eyes with him. "You were correct." There was a glimmer in his gaze, an indescribable quality. "Evelyn, I'm not claiming to regret my life," I interjected softly. "Mark and I have created something enduring, something authentic. Yet, at some point, I believe I lost the ability to desire anything for my own sake." Richard leaned in a bit. And now I found myself swallowing hard. A stillness enveloped us, punctuated solely by the faint murmur of voices in the background. At last, Richard broke the silence, his tone soft. "I simply desire your happiness." I gazed at him, truly gazed at him. He was a man with no obligation to involve himself in my life, no justification for his words, save for the fact that he had perceived something within me that I had yet to recognize. In that moment, clarity washed over me. A decision loomed ahead. I found myself gazing at Richard from across the quaint cafe table, my fingers encircling the comforting warmth of my coffee cup. "All I desire is for your happiness." His words lingered, weighty yet tender, akin to a truth I had long evaded. For years, I convinced myself that contentment sufficed, that security, stability, and loyalty formed the foundation of a fulfilling life. And indeed, they did. Yet Richard had revealed something within me, something I hadn't realized was absent. A longing to experience. I inhaled deeply, the heaviness of my reflections bearing down on me. "Richard, I'm at a loss with all of this." His gaze softened. "You don't need to do anything, Evelyn. Consider what truly brings you joy. When did you last engage in something solely for your own benefit?" I began to speak but hesitated. When was that moment? I had devoted years to making sure Mark felt supported, that his career, his aspirations, his entire existence stayed unblemished. I had crafted a life of structure, of predictability. But what about my own identity? I took a sip of my coffee, the rich, bitter warmth anchoring me for a fleeting moment. I find myself questioning who I am beyond the confines of my marriage. I found myself surprised by my own words. Richard offered me a small, knowing smile. Perhaps it's time to discover the truth. I released a soft, anxious chuckle. That seems quite daunting. Perhaps. But also thrilling, wouldn't you agree? I remained silent. I couldn't respond. Because deep down, I understood he was correct. We lingered in quietude for a moment. The outside world continued its relentless pace. Vehicles glided by, laughter echoed, and the breeze stirred the shimmering autumn foliage. Life rushed on, but perhaps it was time for me to stop and think. At last, I placed my cup down and locked eyes with him. Uncertainty looms ahead, Richard. Yet, I realize it's time for me to embrace life once more. A smile danced at the edge of his lips. That was all I hoped you would understand. When Mark returned that night, I was already at the kitchen table, waiting. He hardly glanced my way as he placed his briefcase down and loosened his tie. It had been a long day, he murmured. I feel utterly drained. I observed him for a moment, this man with whom I had crafted a life, this man I had cherished for decades. As he navigated the familiar spaces of our home, an unspoken gap loomed between us, one I had failed to recognize as it widened over time. I inhaled deeply. Mark, can we talk? He hesitated, his gaze finally meeting mine. About what? I swallowed hard. About us? His brows knitted together in confusion. What about us? I paused, then finally spoke the words that had been simmering within me since last night. I feel invisible, Mark. He blinked. What? I feel as though I've devoted years to being the wife who supports you, who keeps everything in order, who ensures that our life remains stable. And I do love you. Yet, at some point, I faded from view. He frowned, clearly taken aback. Evelyn, what's the source of this? I shook my head. It's been lingering for ages. I just never allowed myself to voice it. He settled into the chair opposite me, his hand gliding over his face in a thoughtful gesture. I had no idea you felt this way. I examined him intently. Have you ever pondered? He remained quiet. In that instant, I understood something heart-wrenching. Mark wasn't an unkind spouse. He wasn't intentionally unkind or indifferent. He had merely believed, as I did, that marriage equated to routine. That familiarity was sufficient. We no longer felt the need to reach out to one another as we used to. Yet, that wasn't truly living. That wasn't love. Not anymore. What are you saying? He finally inquired, his tone careful. I take a deep breath. I must begin to prioritize my own needs once more. His expression dimmed a bit. Are you revealing my secrets? I paused for a moment, then firmly denied it. I'm uncertain about what lies ahead, Mark. However, I'm aware that I can't continue in this way. If we wish for our marriage to endure, a transformation is necessary. He gazed at me intently. For the first time in years, I noticed a flicker in his eyes. Understanding. Perhaps there was an opportunity to mend this. Perhaps there wasn't. Yet, for the first time in many years, I felt prepared to discover the truth.